Media pressure on Joe Biden was unrelenting after MSNBC reported that Biden still supports the Hyde Amendment, which bars direct federal funding of abortion. The former VP was sharply criticized on cable segments, in news stories, and in op-ed pieces, with one Washington Post contributor branding him unfit to lead. And then, less than 24 hours after Rachel Maddow said Biden's position would not stand, he caved. The former vice president changed the stance that his campaign had portrayed as a matter of principle. And some of his fellow liberals were kind of sympathetic.
If I believe health care is a right, as I do, I can no longer support an amendment that makes that right dependent on someone's zip code.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage here in Washington, Buck Sexton, syndicated radio talk show host, and in New York, Jessica Tarloff, a Fox News contributor. And Buck, there's enormous media pressure on Biden to change his position on the Hyde Amendment. There were quotes from leaders of pro-choice organizations, virtually no pro-life voices, virtually no one saying, you know what, this is a principled position by Joe Biden as a Catholic Democrat.
Well, I think that the liberal media was trying to direct him so that the base would be willing to go along with him. I think the media is much more invested in Biden. I know the polls show him at number one than the general left-wing base has been to this point, and they're going to hurt their backs carrying so much water for him because they're directing him to this now, but they'll also have to do the after-action repair here. They're going to have to say, well, what he had believed for 40 some odd years. Turns out he didn't really believe that, but he's making the right move. And so now we can continue to push him in this primary.
Jessica, even if you're pro-choice, there is an argument that for the millions of people who are strongly pro-life, they shouldn't have their tax dollars spent directly on abortion. But as we saw, Rachel Maddow said, no, this is not going to stand. Biden's not going to be able to hold this. And boom, she was right, and he backs off.
Absolutely. When you look at the polling of the general election, which is the conversation we've been having about Joe Biden, nearly 60% of Americans don't feel like our tax dollars should go towards funding abortion. Joe Biden was running in the electability category, right? He was running a general election race in a Democratic primary, which is why he was taking these more middle-of-the-road positions, not Medicare for all, but fixing Obamacare, revising Obama's climate change plan to make it more aggressive, but not the Green New Deal, for instance. So what has happened here, because of the liberal media, Rachel Maddow, as you're saying there, and also activists in the party, as well as his former colleagues in the Senate and in government, has pushed him into the regular Democratic primary race and out of the general election. I think that's extremely dangerous. And as I pointed out Friday on Outnumbered, there are a number of people who are running for president who have voted for the Hyde Amendment themselves that haven't been pushed to address that. Why aren't you asking Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris why they signed those spending bills?
They voted for a lot of those budgets. And my favorite moment was Biden's national co-chairman, Cedric Maxwell. He goes on Chris Cuomo's CNN show Wednesday when Biden was still for the amendment and said it's a matter of faith. And the next day, he calls the flip a profile in courage. The Washington Post noted that without comment. Buck, all the follow-up stories made clear that Biden caved to pressure. There's no question about that. But very few commentators say, like we just heard, well, people evolve, they change their minds. We didn't hear he's weak, he can't stand up to the liberal pressure. Instead, NARAL officials and others were quoted saying, well, we're glad he changed his mind. Let's move on.
Well, far be it for me to tell the Democrats what they should do in their primary and give them advice. But I just have to say, I think that electability, they haven't learned the lesson of 2016 here. I think that Biden, there's a lot of Obama nostalgia with him, to be sure, but he doesn't have Obama's coattails to ride anymore. You look back at what he was in the past, and the media recognize that this is not a front-runner guy. They just don't have anybody yet that the establishment has been able to get behind. So they're trying to help him navigate. I mean, I think actually what was just said a moment ago, I think is correct. They're trying to help him navigate the primary, the fight that he's actually in, which is much more left-wing than the Democratic Party wants to admit.
Which is not our job. And Jessica, the liberal Huffington Post had headline, finally, Biden sees the light on Hyde. The overwhelming tone of the coverage that bothered me is like, just tell both sides was sort of, there's only one acceptable position here.
Yeah, there is also the other side of this, that the media, which everyone says is always in the pockets of liberals, went after Joe Biden voraciously here, which is what they did to the frontrunner as well with Hillary Clinton. If you look at the interview, for instance, Chris Jansen going after Simone Sanders, who's a senior advisor to the Biden campaign, you see a level of aggression that I have not seen with any other candidate. So that's not about them anointing him or trying to get him across the finish line. That would actually seem to me like they were trying to systematically dismantle him.
Yeah, Yes.
Which is the opposite of the going narrative.
I mean, Jess, I just think that they were trying to get him back on. They were trying to be helpful to him to get him back on track, because it's almost like he didn't get the memo about the DNC platform change from 2016.
All right, let me jump in here because Jess, I only got about a minute left. I want to get to the plagiarism story, which I thought Biden got a bum rep. Some staffers on his campaign lifted some language from advocacy groups in drawing up the policy platforms. And now this is not the awful, embarrassing Joe Biden plagiarism scandal of 1987 when he stole language from other politicians. He didn't even know about this. And Buck, we'll start with you. And yet it was like, Biden committed this awful episode of plagiarism.
Yeah, if you're going to oppose Joe Biden, oppose him because he's been wrong on every foreign policy issue for 40 years, oppose him because he's a pure demagogue, because he has no particular accomplishments that he'll stand behind to this point. This is a staffer pulling some stuff from online. It does harken back to a bigger plagiarism issue for him in the past, which I think is why the media jumped on it a little bit. But this isn't going to stop him, just like Joe Biden getting creepy and sniffing people from behind didn't stop him.
You worked that in, but that story. But Jessica, let me just mention that the Washington Post has this front page story for Joe Biden. Plagiarism is the one issue that won't go away. And yet Politico then reported that a lot of 2020 Democrats have lifted material from other policy organizations, including Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders. So it was kind of a non-story.
It totally is. This is what happens to people who are running up front, or it might be someone who isn't adequately liberal for the people who are writing about him, even though he's running this general election campaign, which I think is the smart place to be. I mean, he's the only candidate that is polling successfully with African-American voters, which is also something that does relate directly to the discussion about the Hyde Amendment, which we should highlight here, that this is an issue. The Hyde Amendment penalizes women of color and lower income people in this country, which is a core base for the former vice president. That is important.
I understand the argument against the Hyde Amendment. I just think the media need to tell both sides of that argument. Jessica Tarlow.
I agree with you.
Buck Sexton, great to see you all. Thank you to both of you.
Thanks a lot.